Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The coffee drips slow this morning, filling the kitchen with a soft, rhythmic sound. I stand by the counter staring into the half-full mug, but I'm not really seeing it. It's quiet, too quiet. Kara sits at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like she always does, but there's something different today. She's smiling, but it's not the kind of smile I remember. Her lips curl slightly at the corners, a secretive smirk. She doesn't look up when I say good morning. Doesn't even acknowledge my presence. I sip the coffee. It tastes bitter, but I'm not sure if that's just me. Maybe it's the mood. Maybe it's everything. She laughs quietly at something on her screen, a soft, breathy chuckle that seems like it's meant for someone else. I glance over, trying to catch a glimpse of what she's looking at, but the moment I do, she locks the phone, slipping it into her lap with a practiced ease. A chill runs through me. Why hide something as simple as a laugh? I swallow hard, shaking off the feeling. No, I'm overthinking it. She's just being private. Everyone deserves that, right? But there's an itch under my skin now, something I can't scratch away. Plans today? I ask, trying to keep my voice casual like I'm not noticing how distant she's been lately. Work, she says without looking up. Meeting with a client later. It'll probably run late. She doesn't elaborate, and that's that. Another day, another vague explanation. I nod and finish my coffee, but my eyes keep flicking to her. 7 years. We've been married for 7 years, and somewhere along the way, something slipped. It wasn't obvious, not at first. Just small things, a missed kiss goodnight, a few fewer touches here and there. Then the silences began. Not the comfortable kind we used to share, where words weren't necessary. No, this silence is different. It's heavy, suffocating. I leave for work, but the day drags. My mind isn't where it should be. Instead of focusing on the ad campaign I'm supposed to be presenting, I find myself replaying every interaction with Kara over the past few months. Each moment feels tainted now, like I've been blind to something festering beneath the surface. She's been spending more time in the bathroom lately. I remember that clearly now. Always taking her phone with her, staying in there longer than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone needs privacy, right? But then, I started hearing the faint sound of her voice muffled through the door. Not talking, no. Laughing. Whispering. My stomach tightens as the thoughts whirl in my head. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's all in my imagination, my mind twisting normal things into something sinister. Still, I can't shake the feeling that I'm missing something. Something important. Back at home, it's the same routine. Dinner's quieter than usual. She talks about her day in clipped sentences, giving me just enough to avoid any suspicion. But her phone, always there, never out of sight, vibrates once, twice, each buzz followed by a quick glance from her and a faint smile. That smile. It twists something inside me, makes my blood run cold. I can't help but wonder, who's on the other end of that screen? I don't ask. Instead, I watch. I try to convince myself that it's work or maybe a friend, but deep down, something has already shifted. My trust, the foundation of everything we've built, is starting to crack. I find myself staring at her more when she's not looking, searching for answers in the way she moves, the way she interacts with me. I'm grasping at shadows, hoping that I'm wrong. Later that night, after she's gone to bed, I stand in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her breathe evenly, lost in sleep. The sheets rise and fall with her chest, peaceful, oblivious, but I'm anything but peaceful. I lie down next to her, staring at the ceiling, and the darkness feels oppressive, like it's pressing down on me, suffocating. The space between us is a chasm, and I can't reach her no matter how much I want to. I try to tell myself this is normal. People drift. Marriages go through rough patches. But this feels different. There's a storm brewing, a quiet one, and I'm powerless to stop it. The next day, the signs are there again. Kara is laughing at her phone before we even finish breakfast. This time, I make a mental note of the sound, a light, flirty giggle. She's not laughing with me. She hasn't in a while. I glance at her phone, but again she quickly locks it and the moment passes. I go through the motions of the day. I'm in meetings talking to clients, but my mind is somewhere else entirely. The world around me feels distant, blurry, like I'm walking through a haze. The nagging doubt in my head won't let go. It's there, constantly gnawing at me, whispering that something's wrong. Very wrong. By the time I get home, Kara's in the bathroom again, her phone in hand. I hear the faint murmur of her voice through the door, then a pause, a long pause. I freeze in the hallway just outside the door. My hand hovers near the knob, but I stop myself from opening it. Instead, I stand there listening, feeling a knot of tension twist tighter in my gut. She emerges a few minutes later, her expression as calm as ever, like nothing unusual has happened. She doesn't see me standing there, and when she turns the corner into the kitchen, I finally exhale. The tension's almost unbearable now, building up with every passing day, with every glance at that damn phone. That night, I lie next to her again, staring at the ceiling. The gap between us feels like a black hole. It's pulling everything in, my trust, my patience, my love, and leaving behind nothing but cold emptiness. I try to remember the last time we really connected, really talked. It feels like a lifetime ago. The memories of us laughing, sharing secrets in the dead of night, feel like they belong to someone else, someone we used to be but no longer are. And yet, I say nothing. I don't confront her. Maybe I'm too afraid of what I might hear. Maybe deep down I know the truth, but I'm not ready to face it. Not yet. Days pass and each one is the same. Kara slips further away from me, and I slip further into the darkness of my own mind, haunted by thoughts I don't want to have. One evening I get home late, the house quiet. Kara's not in the living room, not in the kitchen. I call out for her, but there's no answer. And then I hear it, a soft laugh coming from the bathroom. The door's slightly ajar, just enough for me to see her reflection in the mirror. She's taking a picture, a selfie, but not just any kind. Her blouse is unbuttoned, her lips slightly parted, eyes sultry. It's the kind of picture meant for someone else, someone who isn't me. Before I even realize it, I'm moving toward the door, pushing it open just a little more. She freezes when she sees me in the mirror, the phone still in her hand. Our eyes meet, and for a second, time stops. The air between us is thick, heavy with the weight of what I've just witnessed. She doesn't say a word. Neither do I. There's no need. The look on her face, the fear in her eyes, it tells me everything I need to know. She knows I've caught her, and I know that whatever trust was left between us has shattered completely. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at her. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears, loud and deafening. Every ounce of betrayal, of anger surged through me in that moment, but I didn't explode. No, the rage was cold, calculated. I could feel it settling deep inside me, quiet and lethal. Without a word, I turned around, walked to the bedroom, and began packing her things. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. She followed me, standing in the doorway, her voice trembling as she asked what I was doing. "You need to leave," I said, my voice steady, controlled. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. But no. I cut her off. "Pack your bags. You're leaving tonight." And just like that, it was over. The life we'd built together, the love we once shared, it was all gone, crumbling to dust around us. All that remained now was the cold, suffocating silence and the knowledge that I would never be the same. The storm had finally arrived, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, there was something darker, something simmering just beneath the surface. Revenge. I didn't sleep that night. After I packed her things and told her to leave, Kara stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. She wanted to argue, to explain, probably to lie again, but there was no room for that anymore. I couldn't hear another word from her, not one. She didn't leave that night, though. She slept on the couch, or at least tried to, judging by the restless sounds I heard through the door. I lay in bed, the sheets feeling cold and foreign against my skin. The silence between us felt like it was alive, growing, expanding to fill every inch of the house, every crevice of my mind. But my mind didn't stop turning, didn't stop dissecting the last few months or maybe even years of our marriage, trying to find the moment when everything shifted, trying to pinpoint when she had slipped away from me and into someone else's arms. When morning came, I woke before her. I didn't have the strength to see her face again, not after what had happened the night before. So, I left for work early, earlier than usual, without a word. The house was thick with the weight of unspoken things, and I needed air. But it didn't matter where I went. Work wasn't an escape. It couldn't be. My mind was stuck in that house, trapped in the lie I had been living. The hours passed in a blur, my body going through the motions. People spoke to me, but their words were muted, like they were coming from underwater. Deadlines, meetings, campaign pitches, none of it registered. My brain was too tangled in the reality of my broken marriage to focus on anything else. At some point, Sarah from HR walked by my desk and mentioned a meeting I was supposed to attend, but I hadn't even noticed the calendar notification. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, cautious. "You look a little distracted." I nodded, gave her some half-baked excuse about not feeling well, and she moved on. Everyone moved on. Life outside my head kept moving, oblivious to the fact that mine had come to a screeching halt. When I got home that evening, Kara was still there. She had unpacked her things, her bag was gone from where I had left it by the front door, and she was sitting on the couch, arms wrapped around her knees like she was bracing for impact. As soon as I walked in, she looked up at me, eyes red from what I assumed had been a day of crying. "I didn't go," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I could. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand answers, shake the truth out of her no matter how ugly it was. But another part, the colder part, didn't want to hear a thing. There was no explanation that could change what I had seen, no words that could undo the betrayal, and no apology would make the bile in my throat go away. "I didn't want to leave without talking," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "We need to talk, please." I stared at her for a long moment, every ounce of emotion drained from my face. "There's nothing left to talk about." She stood up, taking a step toward me, but I raised a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Kara, don't. Just don't." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I wasn't moved by them. Not anymore. I couldn't afford to be. That night, I went through the motions of pretending I still had some semblance of a normal life. We ate dinner together, though neither of us said much. The tension between us was unbearable. Her phone sat next to her on the table, face down, vibrating softly every now and then. She would glance at it, eyes flicking toward me, then back to her untouched plate. It was almost like she was waiting for me to ask who was texting her. Waiting for me to explode. But I didn't, not yet. I slept in the guest room that night. She stayed in our bed alone. I wondered if she even tried to sleep or if she lay there staring at the ceiling the way I had been doing for weeks. Either way, I didn't care. The next few days were a blur of avoidance. I buried myself in work, or at least tried to, though my productivity was a fraction of what it usually was. My coworkers must have noticed, but no one said anything. It wasn't like me to lose focus, to fall behind, but I could hardly manage to keep my thoughts straight. Every night, I came home and found Kara in the same place, on the couch, looking small and lost. She had stopped trying to talk to me, stopped asking me to hear her out. We were like two strangers now, drifting through the same space, pretending not to notice the giant rift between us. But that wasn't sustainable. We couldn't keep living like this. Something had to give. Then one evening it happened. I had come home early again, feeling a knot of anxiety twisting in my gut all day, unable to focus on anything. The house was quiet when I walked in, as it had been for the past week, but there was something off. I could feel it, like a low hum in the air. Kara wasn't in the living room. The house was too still. I called out her name. No answer. Then I heard it, a soft chime from her phone. The sound came from the kitchen. Curious, I walked toward the noise, and there it was, sitting innocently on the counter, unlocked. For a moment, I stood there, frozen, staring at the glowing screen. I knew what I was about to do was wrong. I had always trusted her, until now. But something dark inside me screamed louder than my sense of decency, louder than the voice telling me to walk away. I reached out and grabbed the phone. The screen lit up with a series of messages, explicit. Pictures she had sent, pictures she had taken in our bathroom. My throat tightened, my chest constricted, and the room seemed to tilt as I stared at the images. She was half naked in them, her face suggestive, seductive, a face I hadn't seen in a long time. And then there was the name, just a single letter, T. I didn't know who he was yet, but he was someone. Someone who wasn't me. The bile rose in my throat, and I barely made it to the sink before retching, my entire body convulsing with the force of my disgust. My mind raced in a million directions at once, anger, hurt, betrayal, and that simmering need for revenge clawing its way to the surface. I set the phone down, my hands trembling, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had loved, the woman I had spent the last 7 years of my life with, had been doing this. While I had been going to work, coming home, trying to be the good husband, she had been sneaking around, sending intimate photos to someone else. There was no coming back from this. By the time she got home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone still on the counter. I had thought I'd confront her, demand explanations, scream, or maybe cry. But I didn't. When she walked through the door and saw me sitting there, her eyes widened. She knew something was wrong. Her eyes flicked to the counter, and I saw the moment her heart sank. Saw it in the way her shoulders tensed, her breath caught. "Kara," I said, my voice cold and detached, almost robotic. "We're done." Her mouth opened, then closed, words dying on her lips. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't need to. The evidence was right there, plain as day. She started, but I cut her off. "No, don't, just don't." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She had thought she could get away with it, had thought I'd never find out. But now that I had, now that it was all out in the open, there was nowhere left for her to hide. "I'm going to bed," I said, rising from the table. "You can pack your things." I didn't wait for her response. I didn't care what it was. The woman standing in front of me wasn't my wife anymore. She was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, she was the woman who had shattered everything we had built together, who had torn my life apart without a second thought. I lay in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me like a boulder. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was controlled now, cold, calculated. Revenge wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a plan. As I drifted off into a fitful, restless sleep, I knew that I wouldn't rest until I made her feel the weight of what she had done. Until I made sure she suffered as much as I was suffering now. Kara wouldn't just lose me, she'd lose everything. I didn't confront Kara immediately, not after finding the messages, the photos. Not after the cold realization that she wasn't just cheating, but that she'd been hiding an entire life from me. My rage was too raw, too sharp to wield. I needed time, space to think. I couldn't let her see me unravel. So I went on with the routine. I played the part of the unsuspecting husband for a few more days, biding my time, letting the weight of her lies crush me from the inside. She still smiled at me, still kissed me goodnight like nothing was wrong, but now I saw her for what she was, a liar, a betrayer, a stranger wearing my wife's face. Every touch burned, every word she spoke was acid on my skin. I kept my distance, forcing myself to stay calm, stay silent. Inside, I was unraveling, but on the surface, I was cold, calculated. I had to be. I wanted her to feel it, the weight of what she'd done. I wanted her to suffer, to crumble the way I had when I saw those messages. But if I reacted too quickly, too emotionally, it would be over before it started. No. This had to be slow, methodical. I wanted her to feel small, exposed, vulnerable. I wanted her to fall apart under the pressure of her own lies. In the quiet hours of the night when she was asleep in our bed, I would lie in the guest room, my mind racing. I began to imagine the steps. The ways I could pull her life apart piece by piece until there was nothing left of the perfect little world she thought she had. It wasn't just about making her feel the pain she'd caused me. It was about making her understand what it was to lose control, to be helpless. The first step was understanding how deep the betrayal went. I had to know who this T was. I needed to understand the full scope of her lies before I could dismantle them. I started small. The next morning, while Kara was in the shower, I unlocked her phone again, my hand steady this time. The bile still rose in my throat as I read through their messages, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about my feelings anymore. It was about control. I found him easily enough. His name was Tim, a name I recognized. My blood went cold as I stared at the screen, the messages now taking on a deeper meaning. Tim wasn't just some random stranger. He was someone I knew, someone we both knew, an old friend from college. We hadn't been close in years, but there had been a time when we hung out regularly, when I'd considered him a friend. He had been at our wedding. He had toasted us, wished us happiness. I closed the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle over me. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't just Kara sneaking around with a stranger. This was a full betrayal of trust. Both of them had taken something from me, planned this behind my back. And now I knew that Kara wasn't just playing around. This had roots. It was deliberate. She was planning something with him, something bigger than I had imagined. I couldn't let her get away with this. That night, after dinner, she kissed me on the cheek like she always did before bed, then disappeared upstairs. I waited until I heard the door close behind her, then slipped into the living room, pulling her phone from her purse. I had the code memorized by now. I scrolled through the messages again, forcing myself to read every word. My hands didn't tremble this time. The rage was cold now, controlled. That's when I saw it, the conversation from earlier that day. T. Just a little longer. We'll get a place together, away from all this. He won't even see it coming. Kara. I know, I can't wait for this to be over. I hate lying to him, but it's almost done. We'll have what we want soon. I could barely breathe as I read the words. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just cheating. She was planning to leave me. She and Tim had been talking about it for weeks, maybe longer, discussing how to walk away from this life we had built together. I had been playing the fool, thinking I still had time, that I was in control. She was going to walk out of my life, take everything with her, and I would be left with nothing. Except now I had the upper hand. I locked her phone, placed it back where I found it, and went upstairs. I stood outside the bedroom door for a long time, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. I could picture her lying there, calm, peaceful, thinking she had it all figured out, thinking I was oblivious. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with possibilities, with plans. If she thought she was going to leave me, she was wrong. I wouldn't let her get the chance. I would tear her life apart from the inside. She wouldn't see it coming. And by the time she realized what I was doing, it would be too late. The next morning, I started small. Kara left for work early, as usual, and I had the house to myself. The first thing I did was log into our joint bank account. We had a good amount saved, enough to start the life we'd always talked about. Only now that life was a lie, and that money wouldn't be going where she thought it would. I transferred half of it into a separate account, one she didn't know about. It was easy, too easy. The first piece of her life, gone. Next, I started following her. She had a routine, lunch with clients, meetings in the afternoon. But I knew there were gaps in her schedule, time when she would sneak away to see him. I trailed her for a few days, watching her slip out of work early, drive to Tim's apartment, laughing as she walked up to his door like nothing in the world was wrong. Like her entire life wasn't built on a foundation of lies. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I just watched. I made notes. I learned their patterns. I learned where they met, when they met, how long they stayed together. I needed to know everything. I needed to know exactly where to hit her, where it would hurt the most. When I had enough, I started to act. I sent her a message, an unknown number. It was simple. Just a single line. He's going to find out soon. I watched her reaction from across the room as we sat in the living room that night. She was scrolling through her phone, smiling at something, probably a message from him. Then her face changed. The smile faded, replaced by confusion, then fear. She glanced at me, but I kept my eyes on the TV, pretending not to notice. She deleted the message and didn't say a word. The next day, I sent another, then another, each one more cryptic than the last, just enough to make her nervous, just enough to make her feel like something was slipping through her fingers. She started to unravel. She became jumpy, nervous. Every time her phone buzzed, she would look at me, eyes wide with panic, as if she was waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I stayed calm, composed. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to say a word. She started making mistakes. Small ones at first, coming home late, forgetting to answer simple questions. She was distracted, constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering who knew, wondering when everything would come crashing down. And it was working. I planted seeds of doubt in her mind about Tim. It was easy enough. An anonymous message here, a vague hint there. Soon she was questioning his loyalty, wondering if he was seeing someone else. I made her believe he was cheating on her, just like she had done to me. They started fighting. I knew because I followed her one night, watching from a distance as they stood in front of his apartment, their voices raised, faces twisted in anger. She accused him of lying, of seeing someone else. He denied it, of course, but the doubt was already there. I had planted it, and now it was taking root. They fought more often after that. She came home late, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. I watched her fall apart in real time, and it felt good. There was no other way to describe it. I was pulling her life apart, piece by piece, and she didn't even know it was me. She thought her world was crumbling on its own. But the best part? She still hadn't confronted me. She still didn't know I was the one behind it all. I walked in on her one day while she was in the bathroom, snapping another set of photos for him. Our eyes met in the mirror, and I saw it. The moment she realized, I knew. The color drained from her face and she froze, phone still in her hand, her shirt half unbuttoned. I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. I wanted her to feel it. The weight of what she'd done, the full force of my betrayal, pressing down on her. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there shaking, her phone still in her hand. I was in control now. And I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The moment I saw the fear in her eyes, as she stood in the bathroom, phone still clutched in her hand, I knew I had her. The silence between us stretched like a taut wire, her wide eyes locked onto mine, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I wasn't giving her that release. I wasn't letting her off the hook that easily. No words, no confrontation, just the weight of my stare and the realization that I was in control now. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, frozen, her shirt still half unbuttoned, the phone still flashing on the screen. I didn't have to say anything. She knew. She knew that I had seen everything, that I had been watching her unravel for days now. The mask she had been wearing, the calm facade, had finally shattered, and beneath it was pure panic. The days that followed were a careful balancing act. I continued to send her the anonymous messages, each one more cryptic than the last. The paranoia I had planted was blossoming into full-blown panic. She jumped every time her phone buzzed, her eyes darting around as if the walls themselves were closing in. She had stopped smiling altogether, her usual air of confidence crumbling into nervous glances and shaky breaths. And Tim, her precious T, was starting to feel the strain too. I had made sure of it. The evidence I had planted, the subtle hints that he was cheating on her with someone else, had taken root. I sent her more anonymous messages, this time suggesting that Tim wasn't as faithful as he seemed. That he had other women, that she wasn't the only one. I watched from a distance as it all came to a head. They met at a small cafe one evening, the kind of place they probably thought was safe, out of the way, where no one would recognize them. I followed her there, parking far enough away to avoid being seen, but close enough to watch the show. She walked in first, shoulders tense, her face pale and drawn. Tim arrived a few minutes later, casual as ever, but I could see the tension in his posture too. The moment he sat down, they started arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. It was all in their faces, the accusations, the denials, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. I smiled, watching as Kara's world started to fall apart, piece by piece. The perfect life she thought she was going to have with Tim was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't even know why. She thought it was him, thought it was his lies, his betrayal. But it was me. I was the one pulling the strings, unraveling her life one thread at a time. When they finally left the cafe, it was clear that things were bad. Tim stormed off, leaving Kara standing on the sidewalk, tears in her eyes, her phone clutched in her hand. I could almost feel the panic radiating off her as she frantically typed out a message, probably to him, begging for an explanation, begging for reassurance that she hadn't lost everything. But she had. She just didn't know it yet. I went home that night, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The cold rage that had been simmering inside me was finally finding its outlet. I could see the cracks in her life, and I was the one who had put them there. The next morning, Kara didn't even look at me when we sat down for breakfast. Her phone stayed face down on the table, buzzing every now and then with notifications that she ignored. She was unraveling, and I could see it in every move she made, every breath she took. The woman who had smiled at me across the table, kissed me goodnight as if nothing was wrong, was gone. What was left was a shadow, a hollow shell of the person she had once been. But I wasn't done yet. I had more to take from her. That afternoon, while she was at work, I made the next move. I logged into our joint accounts again, this time withdrawing more money, transferring it into the hidden account I had set up. I knew it wouldn't be long before she noticed, but that was the point. I wanted her to see it slipping away. I wanted her to feel the helplessness, the fear, the sense of loss. After that, I took it a step further. I began leaving small traces of infidelity for her to find, subtle, almost imperceptible hints that Tim was seeing someone else. I sent anonymous messages from burner numbers, pretending to be another woman, someone who had been with him. Each message was carefully crafted, just enough to plant the seed of doubt in her mind, to make her question everything. The effect was immediate. She came home that evening, her face pale, her hands shaking as she tried to hide the panic building inside her. I watched as she paced around the house, her phone in her hand, her eyes flicking toward me every now and then, as if waiting for me to say something, waiting for the moment when it all came crashing down. But I stayed silent, calm, detached. I watched her unravel. The next day, the fight between her and Tim erupted. I followed her again, watching from a distance as they stood outside his apartment, their voices raised, their face twisted in anger. She was accusing him of lying, of cheating on her, just like she had done to me. The irony was almost too perfect. I watched as Tim denied everything, his frustration mounting as he tried to calm her down. But it was no use. The doubt had taken root, and there was no stopping it now. She came home that night, her face tear-streaked, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't say a word to me. She didn't have to. I could see it all in her expression, in the way she carried herself. Her world was falling apart, and I was the one who had made it happen. The satisfaction I felt was cold, precise. This wasn't about rage anymore. This wasn't about the betrayal. It was about control. About making her feel every ounce of pain she had caused me, and she was feeling it. The final move came a few days later. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, waiting for the right time to strike. I sent out the messages, anonymous of course, to her friends, her colleagues, the people she had surrounded herself with. I made sure they knew about the affair, about what she had done. I sent them the photos, the messages, the proof of her betrayal. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. I watched as her reputation crumbled, as the people she thought were her friends turned on her, as the whispers turned into outright accusations. She couldn't escape it. Everywhere she went, the rumors followed. Her colleagues gave her cold looks, her friends distanced themselves, and the life she had built, the life she had thought was so perfect, began to collapse in on itself. She confronted me one evening, her face pale, her hands trembling as she stood in front of me. "Did you?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. She broke down then, sobbing, her hands covering her face as she begged for answers, for some kind of explanation, for anything that would make sense of what was happening to her. But I just stood there, cold, detached, watching her fall apart. "You did this to yourself," I said, my voice calm, emotionless. "You built this lie, and now you're living in the ruins." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the weight of my words sank in. There was nothing left for her here, nothing but the wreckage of the life she had destroyed. Without another word, I walked upstairs and grabbed her suitcase. I threw it on the floor in front of her, the sound echoing through the silent house. "Pack your bags," I said. "It's time for you to leave." She didn't argue. There was no point. She had nothing left to say. The woman who had once shared my life, who had stood by my side for 7 years, was gone. All that remained was the hollow shell of someone who had betrayed me, someone who had thought she could walk away without consequence. As I watched her pack her things, as I listened to her sobbing quietly under her breath, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To see her crumble, to make her feel the weight of her betrayal. And I had won. But as the door closed behind her, the sound echoing through the now empty house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The silence that followed wasn't the comforting kind I had expected. It was cold, oppressive. I had destroyed her life. I had taken everything from her. But as I stood there alone in the quiet house, I realized that I had taken something from myself too. The revenge had been satisfying, sure. Watching her fall apart had given me a sense of justice, but now it was just me. And for the first time, I wasn't sure that was enough. The house was mine now, but the victory felt hollow. Kara was gone. Her sobbing had faded, her scent slowly dissipating from the room she once occupied. I stood in the living room, staring at the door she had walked out of, waiting for something to shift inside me, some flicker of triumph or closure. But there was only silence. The weight of the house pressed down on me, the walls seeming to inch closer, closing in with every second. I had done it. My plan had unfolded perfectly. Kara's affair was exposed, her reputation shattered, and her relationship with Tim destroyed. I had unraveled her world, made her feel the helplessness I had endured. Every moment of her betrayal had been met with precision and calculation. The revenge had been exacted, cold, complete. But now what? I wandered through the house, trailing my fingers along the furniture we had chosen together, the pictures we had hung. I passed by a framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Greece, both of us smiling, carefree, the ocean sparkling in the background. I couldn't reconcile that version of her with the Kara who had stood in front of me, broken and humiliated, moments before I forced her out. The satisfaction I had expected never came. There was no relief, no peace, just an empty, gnawing feeling that had started to settle in my gut. I had won, but the victory felt like ashes in my mouth. In the following days, I tried to push the thoughts away. I focused on the mechanics of everyday life, cleaning the house, cooking meals, going to work. But everything felt dull, muted. The joy I thought I'd feel from taking my life back, from reclaiming control, was nowhere to be found. At work, people noticed the change. Sarah from HR stopped by my desk again, her voice filled with concern. "You doing okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed. I looked up from my computer, not really seeing her. "Yeah," I lied, my voice flat. "Just tired." She hesitated, clearly unsure if she should push further, but eventually nodded. "If you ever need to talk," I gave her a thin smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. "Thanks, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. The house was a mausoleum of memories I didn't want anymore. Every corner of it echoed with the past. Kara's laughter, the warmth we once shared, even the fights, all of it haunted me now. And I had nowhere to put that feeling, no way to escape it. I avoided our bedroom. The bed we had shared felt like a place of betrayal now, and I couldn't bring myself to lie in it. Instead, I took to sleeping on the couch, where her scent still faintly clung to the cushions. It was a masochistic habit, I knew, but I couldn't stop myself. It was as if some part of me still needed to feel her presence, to remind myself of what I had lost, or maybe what I had destroyed. I became obsessed with watching her downfall unfold. The rumors had spread like wildfire. I heard from mutual friends that Kara had been forced to leave her job. The gossip was relentless. Her colleagues had turned on her after the photos and messages circulated. She was no longer the charming, professional woman they had once admired. She was the subject of scorn and whispers. Tim had left her too. I found out through one of our old college friends who casually mentioned that he'd seen Tim at a bar, alone and looking miserable. Their relationship had disintegrated, just as I had planned. They had torn each other apart, each accusing the other of lies and betrayal until there was nothing left. I should have felt triumphant. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To see her life crumble like mine had. To watch her feel the pain and loss she had inflicted on me. But every time I thought about her packing her bags, her face streaked with tears, something twisted inside me. I had destroyed her, yes, but in doing so, I had destroyed something in myself, too. One night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in our bathroom, the same place where I had first discovered her betrayal, the place where she had taken those private photos, thinking she could keep them from me. I stared at my reflection, but it didn't feel like me anymore. The man looking back at me was hollow, his eyes cold and empty. I turned away, unable to face it any longer. That's when the phone rang. It was late, and I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, if only to break the oppressive silence of the house. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, then a soft voice I hadn't expected. Kara? I didn't know who else to call, she whispered, her voice trembling. A part of me wanted to hang up. This was over. She was out of my life. I had made sure of that. But something in her tone, in the quiet desperation I heard, stopped me. What do you want? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. I don't know, she said, her voice cracking. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't expect it to end like this. Her words hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. What did she expect? Apologies couldn't undo what she had done. But they also couldn't undo what I had done. The things I had set in motion, the pain I had caused her. I had wanted her to suffer, and now she was. But hearing it, knowing that she was broken, didn't bring me any closer to peace. I didn't call to ask for forgiveness, she continued. I wanted you to know that. I'm sorry for hurting you. A strange sensation crept into my chest, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Guilt, regret. I had told myself I wouldn't feel these things, that she didn't deserve my sympathy. But now, in this moment of quiet vulnerability, it was harder to hold on to my anger. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice low. There was a long silence on the other end, and I thought for a moment that she wasn't going to answer. But then, in a broken whisper, she said, I don't know. I was scared. I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix it. He was just an escape. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep the old anger at bay. I wanted to lash out, to tell her that she had ruined everything, that she had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but I didn't. Maybe because I knew deep down that I wasn't blameless either. I had seen the cracks forming in our marriage long before her affair, but I had done nothing to stop it. I had been just as distant, just as absent. I loved you, I said finally, the words barely above a whisper. I know, she replied, her voice thick with tears. And I loved you too. I still do, in a way, but we were broken long before this. We just didn't want to see it. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my head in my hands. She was right. As much as I wanted to blame her for everything, I couldn't. Our marriage had been disintegrating for a long time, and neither of us had been willing to face it. Her affair had been the final fracture, but the cracks had been there all along. I'm leaving town, she said, breaking the silence. I just thought you should know. There's nothing left for me here. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. This was the final goodbye. The end of everything we had built together. And though I had wanted this, had fought for this, it still hurt. "Goodbye, Kara," I said, my voice hoarse. "Goodbye," she whispered, and then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at the blank screen, feeling the emptiness settle in once more. Kara was gone, for good this time, and the silence she left behind was deafening. I had won, hadn't I? This was what I wanted. The revenge, the destruction of her life, the closure. But all I felt now was a cold, hollow space where our life had once been. I stood up, walking to the window, staring out at the empty street. The house was mine now, but it felt like a prison. The echoes of our life together haunted every room, every piece of furniture. And now, there was no escaping them. As I stood there, the weight of everything finally settled on my shoulders. I had gotten my revenge. I had torn her life apart, made her feel the pain she had caused me. But in doing so, I had destroyed something in myself too. There was no going back now. The life I had once known was gone, burned to ashes in the fire of betrayal and revenge. And all that was left was this, a cold, empty house, and the faint echo of a life I could never reclaim. I had traded everything for justice, for control. But now, standing in the silence, I realized the price I had paid was far steeper than I had ever imagined. The house felt smaller now, empty, not just because Kara was gone, but because the life that once filled it was gone too. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter where her phone had been the day I discovered her secret. I could still see it, her phone unlocked, the messages with Tim, the pictures she had sent him. That moment had split my life in two. I thought the revenge would make me whole again, that it would patch over the cracks she'd left in me. But now, as I stood here, the finality of it all sinking in, I realized that it hadn't. If anything, the cracks had deepened. The days bled into each other. I went to work, did my job, came home. The routines I had once relied on felt meaningless now. Each day felt like I was moving through a fog. I tried to lose myself in the tasks that had once distracted me, emails, meetings, reports, but my mind would drift, always circling back to the same questions. Had it been worth it? I had destroyed Kara's life, made her feel the pain I thought she deserved. I had pulled her world apart piece by piece, and now she was out there somewhere, suffering for what she had done. But it hadn't brought me the peace I thought it would. Instead, it left a hollowness, a deep pit in my chest that I couldn't seem to fill. The nights were the worst. I couldn't sleep in our bed, my bed now, but it didn't feel like it. The room was too cold, too full of memories. So I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. And when I did sleep, it wasn't restful. My dreams were filled with fragmented images of Kara, of the life we had before. Sometimes I saw her the way she was when we first met, laughing, carefree. Other times, I saw her face streaked with tears, begging me for an answer that I refused to give. I thought I had been in control of this entire situation, but now I realized something. Revenge had controlled me. It had consumed me. I had been so focused on making her pay, on tearing her down, that I hadn't seen the damage I was doing to myself. One night, after another round of fitful sleep, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror again, the same place where it had all started. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My eyes were hollow, my face gaunt. The anger that had once driven me had drained away, leaving only this, emptiness. I turned away, unable to look at myself any longer. I spent most nights avoiding the house now, finding excuses to stay out late. I would go to a bar downtown, sit at the counter, and nurse a drink, watching people come and go, their lives moving forward while mine seemed stuck in place. The bartender didn't ask questions. He just poured the drinks and I drank in silence, trying to numb the thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't escape them, though, not even with alcohol. Kara's voice haunted me, her words from that final phone call playing over and over in my head. We were broken long before this. She had been right. I didn't want to admit it, but she had been right. Our marriage had been unraveling for a long time, and I had done nothing to stop it. Instead, I had chosen to focus on her betrayal, using it as an excuse to justify my anger, my need for revenge. I hadn't wanted to face the fact that I had failed too, that I had let the distance between us grow, ignored the warning signs, and allowed everything to fall apart. I had destroyed her, yes, but I had destroyed something in myself too. One night, as I sat at the bar, staring into the amber depths of my drink, Sarah from HR walked in. I hadn't expected to see her outside of work, and for a moment, I debated whether or not to make my presence known. But she spotted me before I could slip away. "Hey," she said, sliding onto the stool next to me. "Fancy seeing you here." I nodded, managing a thin smile. "Yeah, just needed a drink." Her eyes searched my face, and I could tell she saw through the facade. She'd been checking on me at work, her concern barely masked under casual conversation, but I had always brushed her off. Now, there was no escaping it. "You don't look so great," she said, her voice soft but direct. "You've been off lately." "What's going on?" I let out a breath, feeling the weight of her words press down on me. I could have lied, given her some excuse about work stress or lack of sleep, but I was too tired for that. Too tired to keep pretending. "My wife cheated on me," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth even though I had been living with them for months now. "And I found out, so I ruined her life. I made sure she lost everything." Sarah didn't respond right away. She just sat there, letting the silence stretch between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "And did it make you feel better?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "I thought it would. I don't know. I thought if I could just make her hurt the way she hurt me, then I'd feel better. But it didn't. It didn't fix anything." Her gaze softened, but she didn't pity me. I could see that. She was just listening, and somehow that made it easier to keep talking. "I feel empty," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've ruined everything. Not just her life, but mine too. And now, I don't know what to do with that." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Then she looked at me, her eyes steady. "You can't undo what's been done, but you don't have to let it define you either." I stared at her, not sure what to say. The idea that I could somehow move forward, that there was a way out of this suffocating emptiness, felt impossible. But as I sat there, the weight of her words slowly began to sink in. Maybe I couldn't fix what I had done. Maybe there was no redemption for the way I had destroyed Kara's life, the way I had let revenge consume me, but I didn't have to stay in this place forever. "I don't know how to move on," I said, the words feeling raw, exposed. Sarah gave me a small, sad smile. "No one does." "But you start by making the choice. You let go of what you can't change, and you figure out what's next, even if it's just one step at a time." I sat with her words for a long time, turning them over in my mind, letting go, moving forward. It sounded simple, but it felt like trying to climb out of a pit I had dug for myself. A pit so deep, I wasn't sure I could ever reach the top. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth trying. The bar started to clear out, and eventually Sarah stood up, giving me a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Take care of yourself, okay?" I nodded, watching her leave, her words echoing in my mind long after she was gone. When I finally returned home that night, the house felt different. Still empty, still haunted by the memories of what I had done, but different. There was a shift, a faint glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how long it would take for the guilt to fade, or if it ever would. But for the first time since this all began, I wasn't consumed by the need for revenge, the need to control everything. I wasn't numb anymore. I could feel again, pain, regret, maybe even a little bit of forgiveness, though I wasn't sure who it was for yet. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the sunlight filtering through the curtains. The air felt lighter, like the house was finally breathing again. Maybe I could too. I didn't regret what I had done. I couldn't. Kara had betrayed me, and she had deserved the consequences of her actions. but I regretted losing myself in the process. I regretted letting that darkness take over, and now I had to figure out how to live with that. There was no going back. The life we had built was gone, and I had burned it to the ground. But maybe, just maybe, there was something new waiting in the ashes, something I could build for myself if I had the courage to take that first step. I stood up, looking around the room one last time before heading out. The day was waiting, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was ready to face it, alone but alive. And that was enough, for now.